Those of you coming from my original YouTube channel will probably be aware of the numerous times I have had filming mishaps of the completely lost my footage variety. But since this is a brand new channel, I get to say this is the first time I've had a filming mishap. Without getting into the details, I had been making some what we call in the industry boo-boos with my capture footage. And so it did not just skip frames. It would be easier to count the number of frames I did capture. So after figuring out why that is, I fixed it. The trouble is that I had already filmed my scouting lap, the first sector, and 3 days of the second sector. So unfortunately, you're not gonna see my progression through those sectors. And I'm not gonna fake it and act like I don't know what I'm doing and then, do know what I'm doing. I'm gonna go through it just based on what I've learned, sort of talk myself and you through what I've learned so far. What we're gonna do now is go through some of the scouting laps. Now I will mention, whether it's relevant or not, I've jumped to the European circuits, Brands Hatch, where I was at Suzuka just recently on the first circuit. The reason why I've done so is because I have discovered that if you take a look at my RSR's oil, you will notice that it is not good, also known as bad. I can't do anything about it because I don't have what's called GT Auto, which is basically the repair shop, because you have to unlock that through like the cafe missions or whatever. So the next cafe mission I have to do is in the European circuits. So I'm trying to tackle those so that I can get GT Auto and not grenade my RSR. But for now, let's just do some time trials, get refamiliarized with the circuit, because to be fair, all I've been doing is the circuit experience. So I've only been doing sectors 1 and 2 in a specific car. So we have to get familiar with the circuit again. So my initial plan at this point was, as you saw with Suzuka, to actually go through the map and sort of theorize based on the map what I think the approach should be. However, having driven this track before filming this, and knowing the fact that there is so much more to the track than just the 2D map, I think maybe we'll save that till afterwards. But for now, we'll go through a somewhat slow, methodical evaluation lap. So let's do that now. So the main theme with this track that I've found is pretty much no turn is on a flat surface. Everything is almost downhill. I'm thinking to turn in at this green point, getting a late apex so that I can get the wheel straight earlier and throttle down that hill. Here, where the curbing comes in on the left, is probably a good place to start turning in. Turn number 3, again downhill, being really careful not to get on the throttle too early. I don't know how I figured this out, but something about this made it feel like it would be a late apex as well. I'm getting kind of tired of saying that, but this turn seems like a long, sweeping turn. Foreshadowing, I had a lot of trouble figuring out how to enter that turn with the proper amount of speed. Turn 6 and turn 7 are very similar to each other. A little bit deceptive, because one is sharper than you think and the other's not as sharp. And as you just saw, turn 7 has no exit curbing. Turn 8 seems very similar to turn 3. And coming down the straight, here was a little bit tricky to figure out when to turn in, but that concrete slab there is a good starting point. Again, you notice how much the elevation changes, and that's really going to change how the car behaves. Lots going on in a seemingly compact circuit, I feel like. But the biggest thing that makes it so relatively overwhelming is the fact that every single turn has its own nuances, particularly because the entry and the exit are like not at the same elevation, and it just changes the dynamics of how the car behaves. This comes back to the circle of friction, but to put it quickly right now, the tires only have a finite amount of grip. So if you're applying turning forces to the tires, they have that much less grip to apply to braking or acceleration. If you're turning the wheel and then applying throttle, your tires are going to run out of grip. You need to straighten the wheel out in order to give the tires grip credit to be able to apply it towards accelerating. That becomes even more sensitive when the car is constantly losing weight and therefore losing grip. So it's just really tricky, but becomes very interesting. My point is, you're going to hear me talking even more about late apexes, because if the apex is later, my wheel can be straighter coming out of that apex and therefore accelerating. Did I mention there's going to be a lot of late apexes? But before that, because the sun was setting, a little intermission to play with some of the lighting. We'll give it a shot. I don't know. I'm playing around. Bear with me. Let's go through the lap slower and just sort of talk through each turn, maybe. So here comes the start-finish line. Not going to go too aggressive. So coming up to the first corner, there's a braking zone here, and then a little bit of green here. I'm wondering if it's worth using that. This has got to be a late apex. One, because it kind of decreases its radius, but also it's a drop. So if I can get my wheel straighter while going through the turn, I can accelerate out better, and I can create more downforce as opposed to a lateral load. From under here, around that overpass is where I want to start braking. Be in second gear, maybe start turning in when that rumble strip ends on the left. My feeling here is I was hitting an early apex, so maybe I should be apexing somewhere around there. Maybe when that new left outer rumble strip comes in, maybe. And then work my way out. Again, it's downhill, so wanting to start accelerating while the wheel is as straight as possible. That's what I think. Braking somewhere between that board and this curbing. Coming through here in about third gear. And then I want to brake late here, but this is also a late turn in. So maybe start turning in where that rumble strip ends. Where that line is where my apex should be roughly. And then coming out. Staying on the outside because the track goes to the right, which automatically puts me onto the left side of the track, setting up for here. This seems like a high-speed corner. Fourth gear for sure. Fifth was too much. But I'm gonna have to figure out how to carry some energy through there. I think down to third here, use that strip. That's gonna keep me going fast, I think. And again, the track brings me to the outside here, but the markers are on the inside. I think that's third gear also, but it's sharper than the previous turn. Down to third again here. Sort of like turn 2 or 3. Read on the back straight. Want to start turning in at that concrete portion. Missed the apex there. But again, strange elevation changes. And across the line. So these first couple of laps, as you can see on the right-hand side, I started out fairly slow and then started to drop the times really just because of the fact that I was becoming familiar with the direction of the track, not so much honing my skills necessarily. But what I'm trying to do, as you can see here, is really be conservative into these turns and try and get to where I need to be. However, because of the fact that there's these elevation changes and the weight distribution of the car is constantly changing, or the general weight on the track is changing, for example, in turn 8, you can hear and see the understeer. And this starts to become a bit of a theme. Speaking of late apexes, one of the things I started trying to experiment with is really forcing that late apex, but forgetting about the wonderful physics anomaly that is Brands Hatch. And again, the name of the game for these laps is just understeer. But what it is showing me is where the limit of the front end is on some of these turns. Like, for example, here, being able to get onto the green, using the width of the track. Here is really interesting because it really requires you to be conservative in bringing the car, reining the speed in so I can actually get it to that apex. Managing some of that understeer a lot better, but you notice the wiggling on the way out. It's just really a matter of getting comfortable with stabilizing the car. But in any case, now I think would be a good time for us to go through the map, which is going to be 2D, but we have the context of all the 3D. Right from the jump, turn 1 is really downhill. And so getting the apex somewhere around there in order to get a straighter line coming out, and getting the wheel straight allows me to apply more throttle and really create, like I said, more downforce down that hill, just digging into the track. Setting up for this hairpin at turn 2, what you're gonna notice is that as I'm starting to come around this, I'm moving my apex further and further back, which then allows me to exploit the full sort of radius of that turn, realizing that it might not actually be one fixed apex, but I may have to enter the turn at a certain spot and really hug the curvature of that turn, which we're gonna see has a little bit of an effect. Coming into turn 3, this is a really interesting spot where you're using the trail braking while the track is changing its elevation. Now for turn 4, looking at the map makes me understand why I figured out that it is in fact the late apex, because if you look at the turn, it's a decreasing radius. And so the actual tightest part of the radius is actually around here, which means the apex is going to be around there. And that's sort of where that line is. And so what's really interesting about this turn is the fact that as you're coming around, you have to sort of mitigate some of the speed, but also figure out the appropriate line to bring the car in so that it's timed perfectly with that apex that you've chosen. Down this straight, no big deal. But then here comes turn 5, which it was becoming really tricky to figure out where my braking point's gonna be and like sort of what type of speed to carry into that turn. Am I gonna be trail braking? Should I be in 5th gear? Should I be in 4th gear? Am I carrying maintenance throttles? It was really weird, and it almost feels like a complete anomaly to the rest of the track. Now, turn 6 and turn 7, I was sitting here saying that turn 6 is not so tight and turn 7 is much tighter. Turns out it's the opposite. Turn 6 is much tighter, as you can see on the map. But the really interesting and crucial thing to remember here is that turn 6 has exit curbing. Turn 7 does not. Turn 8 just felt more and more like turn 3. Again, just nailing that trail braking while the elevation is actively changing. And turn 9, once again, is a downhill turn, which makes it super easy to scrub the front. So being really mindful of that, and being mindful of one final thing. Here's what I was talking about with turn 2. As you can see, this time I tried to hug the entire curvature, which seemed to help. And what also helped through turn 3 and 4 is reining in some of that speed to prevent the front from washing out, getting me closer to the apex. And while still a bit tricky, I was starting to get the hang of sliding the car a little bit into turn 5. And then with turn 6, realizing that I've got more runoff to use, so I should use it, as opposed to turn 7, where I don't. But the tricky thing became using the whole track. Turn 8, again, mitigating some of that understeer by just reining in the speed. And this is what it did to my lap. And this time it's hard to figure out what my pain points are, partly because at this stage I'm not super familiar with the track, but also because, you know, every single turn has its own little nuances. But if I had to nail it down to any specific things, definitely turn 5. I'm gonna be spending time figuring out how to maximize speed through it, because there's so much speed to be had in that turn. It's all happening fairly quickly. It's going to be an interesting one.